The film begins in a power station outside the country, and the workers were celebrating a colleague's birthday. But suddenly they saw something strange on the surveillance cameras. A shadow was moving in the opening, but suddenly a mysterious monster attacked him. The man tried to return to the office, but a group of monsters caught up with him and started killing everyone in the building. And when the eclipse covered the sun, the creatures began to appear all over the planet, killing millions of people and bringing tears to cities. And the news called it the Day of Judgment, and the soldiers were sent to fight these monsters in a war that lasted as long as the eclipse, and millions of lives and huge amounts of resources counted in the fighting. But in the end, all the creatures were destroyed, and humanity began to age from the second, and they were determined protective devices called portals on the possibility that if the creatures decided to return to them another 15 years later. The world has been living a normal life since then, and Dave works as a scavenger in a company that does not pay him well, and his mission is to enter openings in order to remove dead animals. At a local school, Laura works as a teacher and has become his friend, the teacher Milton, who is always there. He is arguing with her to go out with her, and Laura has been divorced from Dave for a long time, and there are still some problems between them that are resolved, but today she finally agreed to Milton's invitation. And at the same time, her son Tyler is meeting his friend Maddie, who is worried about the upcoming eclipse, and Tyler tells her that there is nothing to worry about because there is a lot. An eclipse occurred in the last 15 years, and nothing happened. At the same time, Officer Jarrett was contacted by the workers at one of the gates and asked him to come so that they could confirm that there was major seismic activity. The reservation had been approved, and when Jarrett arrived at the gate, he felt that this time there was no training or anything needed, and he checked all the systems. But suddenly the electrical box exploded, causing them to lose an entire network in the city. Dave was going to take Tyler from Laura's house, and when the boy was playing video games, the parents got into a fight with each other. It turned out that Laura was pregnant with Taylor at the time of the recent disaster, but Dave was not with her at the time, and she still did not allow him, and Tyler interrupted them. He went out with his father, and then, in the middle of the night, Davey received a call from his uncle, Ted, who was sure that the new day of reckoning would be tomorrow. Davey decided to get his family his or her food before the eclipse started, and Tyler was watching the news and was upset when he saw that there were millions of dead fish appearing on the beaches everywhere, and this was one of the signs that I had noticed 15 years ago. This moment, the first monster appeared at the gate and pitched on the stairs. At the same time, Laura called Dave and told him that she had seen the news and wanted Tyler to come home because Milton had a strong reservation and Dave wanted Tyler to stay with him and fight while. So, Tyler received a message that made him leave the house in secret. When Dave was looking for him, he found a note in his room with Maddie's number. Milton was rushing Laura because the radio was filling up, so they had to be there quickly. When Laura told him that Tyler had walked in, Milton used the boy's phone number to trace the location. On a special program, he met him in Saka Park, and Tyler went there with Maddie, who was worried and afraid because her family had left her. And Tyler promised her that he was not like his father and would never leave her alone. But suddenly they heard a loud sound, and large flocks of birds appeared in the sky, and this was a second sign for the reckoning, and the people in the park ran in horror, and the roads were filled with families trying to leave the country. David was stuck in a huge traffic jam, but when he saw the birds flying, he left the car and continued the search on his feet. The gate, the workers were checking the systems when they heard strange noises. Suddenly a monster appeared and started attacking one of the men. She ran and the other soldiers opened fire. It appeared that ordinary bullets were not the target of the monster, and after a few moments a guest finally found Tyler Ramadi before the emergency calls started ringing out, the sound of which filled the entire city. Thank God, Laura appeared with Milton, and they took the three of them in Milton's car. About an hour remained before the eclipse. The city was in complete chaos, and all the people were trying to escape. The roads were crowded with traffic, and the family was crowded for a while. They saw sectarians walking around the cars, frightening the drivers with their colorful faces, and the sectarians believed that the end was coming. When Milton finally saw his opportunity, he went bad as quickly as possible and succeeded in getting the family to the forces, but unfortunately here he was also in a mess with many people begging to be taken somewhere inside. At the same time, the army says that only women and children are allowed, and Dave told Tyler to go in with Laura and Maddie for the talent. Pillar regretted it and went back to his father and told him that he would never leave him behind, and the women followed him outside. That moment, the sign announced that the reinforcement was full, and the group ran and returned to the car while they were discussing among the options available to them. Tiff wanted to go to the desert bakery, but Milton suggested that they hide in the school because it was closer and there was also a basement, but after that they were stuck in a second crowd, so they got out of the car when an earthquake struck the area and the eclipse started, and with the time of sunset and the world entering darkness, the monsters began to come out and attack, and immediately took over on the city and began to kill without mercy, as happened 15 years ago, and Dave insisted that they must leave the city and wanted to drive, but Milton was upset because this was his car and he knew how to save everyone, and there was a fight and beatings, but the fight was broken when a flying monster came down and kidnapped Milton, and Laura screamed, and Dave pushed her into the car. Finally, he caught the police so that he could take his family out of the city. Finally, as they were driving next to the canal, they began discussing theories about the origin of the monsters and asking if these monsters were soldiers sent from God or not. At the end, the car started running out of gasoline and Dave wanted to find a replacement for it, which was parked next to a group of cars. He began to search inside until he discovered that there were bodies among them. When he finally found an empty one, he entered inside it, but he found the driver who was hiding behind the passenger seat. He pulled him down and revealed to him that there was a monster nearby, and the monster was looking around the cars for other victims. When he passed next to these two men, thank God he did not see them. He continued on his way. Then a monster found one of the corpses and began to eat in it. He then began to roll the carriage quietly and carefully at Laura and the children. Now the two carriages were standing next to each other. Flora and the children tried to run from one carriage to the other, and even though they were very calm in it, the monster noticed him and ran after them, and the big man got out of the carriage and sprayed the monster with salt. The monster stopped for only a moment, then jumped on the man and began to eat in it. The family took advantage of this opportunity and finally drove away from the area and took a deserted road in the mountains, and swarms of monsters gathered in the city from all sides. In the end, they reached the hideout, which was a real strong concrete building, and the doors were closed. It was locked and there were cameras on the roof, but no one came out when the family started screaming and banging on the door and letting it go inside. What they did not know was that Ted was sitting at his computer and watching them on the cameras, and someone was holding a gun to his brain. At that moment, swarms of monsters appeared in the mountains and began. She was running to the hideout, and the family was starting to get nervous, and Dave grabbed a key to protect the family, but then the door of the hideout finally opened and they entered inside, and the family met Ted and his wife Stella, but they were surprised when they found Jarrett and his father came out. Ted's friend was in the war and separated from his unit, so he came here asking for help, and Dave noticed that he had a gun, and this made him suspicious. Then the group ate together, but they couldn't stop noticing on the screens how the monsters were trying to break down the door, and this made everyone nervous. Even using the radio was useless because they were hearing screams. Maddie asked how The monster sensed them, and she explained that they were interacting with the light and the heat, but he was wondering if they could see people's souls. He also told about his story and how he survived the Day of Judgment. He said that he was working in an oil refinery, and when the monsters entered there, he was able to dive into a pool of salty mud and bury himself, but he could hear the sound of the monsters killing all his colleagues, his friends, and he was neighbor, busy with his story. Ted shower Dave grabs and hides the knife, but without realizing it, outside there's a monster resembling a millipede, crawling through a small hole in the grill on the window. Then Jarrett announced that he would be the first one to guard it, so Ted decided that the rest would rather play coach instead of sleeping and look at Dave. In his opinion, it has a meaning, but Gary noticed the signal and took the gun out of the holster and let Dave put the knife while explaining that Ted was against the idea, that he preferred it, but he sympathized with Stella and he had survived the first time and was determined to escape the second Yamo, no matter what the cost. And suddenly Teller threw himself on Jerry in order to try to take the gun, but Jarrett pushed him far away and there was a violent fight, but Maddie cut them off and warned them that they were not listening to the monsters again. Then the monster that looked like a millipede mite came out of the woods and bit Stella, while Ted was removing the creature from his wife's neck and sprinkled salt on him. Dave hit Jarrett so he could take his gun and tried to hit the creature, but Maddie was able to. She kills him with a knife. After that, they tied up Jarrett and tried to stop Stella's bleeding, but they needed special medical attention. This moment, they noticed on the screen that there was a big monster constantly hitting the door in front of her and trying to enter, and Dave said that they had to walk, but Ted didn't want to go out and said that his wife couldn't go out. Outside, Estelle wanted him to walk, and she thought of the ground path under the bank which leads to the mountains. Jarrett said that he had a car full of gasoline and he could take everyone to the gate. The group did not know how to believe him until Gerard convinced them and told them that he would benefit from his help, and they decided to walk together. But the first time he revealed to them that he has a whole arsenal of weapons, and everyone armed themselves. While the group was entering the tunnel, Dave opened the front door and detonated the first monster that entered before it caught up with the rest. After the tunnel was closed well, they went outside and noticed that Stella was suffering while she was walking because she started to turn into a monster. As well, later on while they were walking on the road, Tyler saw a monster standing like this, and the monster looked like it was dead, so Maddie tried to touch it, but Tyler stopped her. But when she turned, a long shield came out of a hole in the ground and grabbed her legs and tried to pull her out, and Maddie screamed wildly. And Tyler and Dave caught her, and Laura hit the shield to make her come back, and after Maddie the group was free, they ran and ran. He convinced Davey to dismantle it so that he could help if the attack happened again. Well, the rest of them did not know was that Dave was trying to hide an injury to his armor. After a while, they reached the top of the mountain and saw the city burning. When they found Garrett's vehicle, they were devastated when they saw that it was not working. At that moment, monsters appeared on the top of the mountain and she ran toward them, so she tried to start the motor again, and Estella grabbed Tedda's gun to end her life before she finished transforming, and Tedda fought her all the way until he took the gun and came back and asked her to get into the car, but Dave knew that there was no hope and pulled Ted behind Estella. She waited for the monsters to come, and they quickly ate her and finally left. Was able to start the car, and the group ran away, leaving the monsters behind them. On the way, they received a radio signal and heard that almost all of the shelters could not withstand the attack and were destroyed. Finally, they reached the gate, but no one answered the radio, and the door was also open. The group entered carefully inside and discovered that there was no electricity, so Jagart and Dave decided to fix it, and the rest. They went to look for a first aid box because they discovered that Ted was injured in his back, and the rest took care of Ted and David, the escapees returned, and Jared explained that the gate was prepared for a second invasion and was full of salt water, but the hole was very deep, and when the electricity came back, Dave and Jared started to return to the group, but suddenly Jared sensed, with blood dripping on his hand, he looked up and found a corpse. At the same time, something in the darkness made a loud sound. The two of them ran and returned to the group to discuss the options available to them, because they still had 2 hours until the eclipse ended, and my neighbor was about to hide in a chemical warehouse because its doors are explosion-proof. As soon as I leave the room, in the first aid, a mutant attacked Jarrett, who fought with Dave to deal with him and defeat the monster, but the noise they made caught the attention of another monster, so Gerard got very frightened and ran to a door and locked it behind him, leaving everyone behind him. Then he gave himself an injection so he could begin to resist the transformation. He put his family's cheek in the room again and noticed that there were lines distribution, meaning the tank on the other side of this precaution made him come up with an idea and make a plan, which is that he will direct the salty water through the tank's pipes in order to prevent the monsters. Before Laura could walk, at this moment, the door was broken. So I ran and Dave walked into the ventilation and noticed a monster eating its prey in the room, and when he reached the tank and tried to remain calm and turn on the tap, and the water started to fill the containers. Then Dave came back, but the monster sensed him and started running after him and grabbed his leg. Dave resisted and sprinkled salt on him and let the monster crumble to dust. At the same time, the rest of them found themselves surrounded by monsters, and Tyler opened fire on them, and suddenly Dave's voice was heard from the loudspeakers and he was calling. One of them activated the fire alarm. The monsters were approaching. Fatted said to Taylor Sex, but this is a monster that they attacked once and killed him quickly. Tyler continued to fire until he ran out of ammunition, so he activated the fire alarm and let the salty water begin to fall on the monsters and made them crumble to dust while they were screaming from the pen. This moment, the eclipse was over. And all the monsters started to return to their world through the portal, but this caused a second earthquake to happen, and Laura and the children tried to move again, but before that, it happened, and the one who was starting to lose his mind due to the transformation hit Tyler and hit them in the shoulder, but before he hit the second guest, he appeared behind him and hit Jared in the brain with a fire extinguisher, and David gathered with his family again, and a large monster appeared from underneath and attacked Jart and swallowed it whole. The family ran and entered the medical unit and made a salty mixture in a cylinder and threw it at the monster as soon as he kicked in the door and killed him straight away. After that, the family went outside and saw that the world had been completely destroyed, but now they are ready to start rebuilding. From now on, I will summarize our film and we will meet you in a new summary. Thank you for watching.